president's peace envoy to Russia got the big middle finger from Vladimir Putin. Just how is the president responding to what can only be described as a tremendous level of disrespect? And just what message is Putin trying to send? Plus, Zelensky has announced that the Kursk incursion has achieved its objectives, and it looks like they are going to be withdrawing from Kursk. Just what does this mean for Ukraine's bargaining position? We're going to talk about all of this. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's do it. Okay, so this is one of those stories that actually didn't get onto my radar at all until, of course, I checked Trump's Truth Social, right? Nothing more classically amplifies a bad story like spending apparently 6 paragraphs or whatever denying it. So his tweet is pretty weird. He calls it the fake news as usual, at it again. Why can't they be honest? And he says, last I read that President Vladimir Putin of Russia kept his use of capitalization drives me crazy. Highly respected ambassador and special envoy Steve Witkoff waiting for over 9 hours when in fact there was no wait whatsoever. Other meetings with other representatives of Russia did take place, and obviously they took some time, but they were very productive. From there, things went quickly and efficiently, and all signs seemed to be hopefully very good. In conclusion, there was no 9-hour wait or any wait at all. The only reason that they made that story up is to try and demean because I think he means the news media, are sick degenerates and to report news correctly. That's why they've lost their ratings. And then, thank you for your attention. And then he signs off, thank you for your attention to this matter. God bless America. And then signs it down to J. Trump. This is, honestly, when the president is rolling out cope, you can tell because he signs it with his full signature. The more it's like seething cope, the more he signs these things. And the fact that he may actually not think that Steve Witkoff was disrespected. But in fact, I tried to find one of these stories. There are a bunch here, like the Daily Wire, for example, right? But this is, again, sort of amplifying it here, where they say, okay, Sky News, actually a British news outlet, reported that Witkoff was in Moscow for a little over 12 hours, and he was waiting for at least 8 of those hours before meeting with Putin. Putin had been spending time with Belarusian leader Lukashenko for a meeting that was scheduled at the last minute, leading us to say that Putin was sending a message to the United States that he was in charge and will do what he wants on his timetable. Now, this is just absolutely classic a power play, right? Now, you have to think that you have to place things in important context. The first is that Putin and Lukashenko meet on an incredibly frequent basis, and they are in almost constant contact because, of course, Belarus is a virtual puppet state of the Kremlin's. So the idea that there was a last-minute meeting that lasts over 8 hours is itself kind of preposterous. And remember, this is the best opportunity for someone like Vladimir Putin to achieve the peace. He desperately wants a peace. He absolutely supports a ceasefire. And the country that you have, again, by his own narrative, he's at war with, the United States, the primary backer of Ukraine, is sending an envoy to meet with you. And so what exactly priority should be your meeting, right? Imagine the roles were reversed. Vladimir Putin calls Trump and says, I want to end this war. I want to find terms. So I am going to board a plane and fly to JFK. What other thing could possibly soak up 8 hours of the president's time in the event of something like that, right? What could possibly do it? And the answer is, of course, nothing. Nothing would be a greater priority than this, a meeting at the levels which have not taken place in years. Remember, this is the president's personal envoy. This is the fact, it's actually looks even worse because Trump spends a lot of this tweet saying that this is a presidentially appointed envoy and a full ambassador. And making this full ambassador and special envoy that reports directly to the president wait for 8 hours on a meeting that Putin absolutely knew was scheduled is absurd. Now you're going to say, well, he didn't wait. He met with lower level officials. But again, are any of those officials decision makers? No. Did any of those officials have what could possibly have been covered in those meetings that was not covered that could not be addressed directly with Vladimir Putin. Remember, this is Russia we're talking about. In the United States, for example, if you wanted to meet with leadership, it's possible that you would say, hey, I have to meet with the head, for example, the Senate Majority Leader and the House Majority Leader, and then I will meet with the president, right? Because we have a system where there's no single center of power in our government, particularly for foreign affairs. But in Vladimir Putin's Russia, Vladimir Putin is the be-all, end-all. He is the final decision authority for everything. And remember, this is an unprecedented opportunity to end the war that Putin's official policy is he totally wants done. So the fact is that he fed him low-level functionaries. And if you've ever worked in government, particularly in, again, the internal affairs investigations that I would handle, this is an extremely common tactic by these high-level authority figures who want to disrespect you. They want to throw you off. They want to get you emotionally compromised. And they do that by wearing you down, by feeding you low-level functionaries before they are willing to make themselves available. I've seen that happen. I've seen it happen to the point where I walk by the person in their office just sitting there. I can see them, and they're feeding me some low-level secretary that I have. And the fact is, sometimes they think that I'll actually just go away. So that's part of the tactic. He may have thought that Steve Witkoff will actually be like, this was your big opportunity, but I gave you 3 hours and now I'm gone, right? So the fact is that there might be, to give the president some benefit of the doubt, this might be a little bit of chess here. And the reason is because it would be too destabilizing in Trump's mind to sit there and say, Vladimir Putin, you spit in the eye of my ambassador. For someone who wants peace, you're really being a jerk. Totally possible. But you can't, he may not want to come out and say that. So instead, he's going to go, the fake news. Steve Witkoff was not kept waiting for 9 hours. He merely met with other low-level representatives as Putin fucked off and did whatever he wanted. And so it's fake news to say that it was disrespectful. In fact, he may have even stuck the word demean in there to remind Putin this was demeaning to my ambassador. And there's a little bit of evidence that this could be the case, right? Again, I'm skeptical because the president makes so many unforced errors when he personally becomes involved in things that I'm a little I always never discount the, like, let's see if I can find it here. I always discount the just natural chaos, right? Here we go. Sorry, this is God, the Times of Israel is always the most buggy, ad-filled website. But the point here, the Trump administration is now weighing a travel ban and restrictions for dozens of countries, including Russians, Bhutan, but it's part of a 43-country list that includes Afghanistan, Iran, right? So this is associated with Russia. Syria is associated with Russia. Cuba, North Korea, obviously both associated pro-Russian allies. There's a second group of 10 countries like Russia itself that would face partial suspensions to impact tourist and student visas as well as immigrant visas. Business travelers from those countries could be allowed to enter the U.S. So, right. The report noted this potential inclusion of Russia on the list came as U.S. President Donald Trump was trying to reset relations with Vladimir Putin and Moscow. So this may be a signal to Russia to say, listen, this was a bad faith action, and now we're going to respond with our own bad faith actions. Now, again, if you've been following this channel for any period of time, you know that Vladimir Putin is nothing but bad faith actions. He's duplicitous. He lies, right? We have, of course, the Budapest Memorandum, in which Russia said we're never, ever, ever going to annex Ukrainian territory. Then we have two back-to-back Minsk Accords, which were totally ceasefires with Russian-backed separatists that lasted no longer. The ink wasn't even dry when Russia violated those ceasefires. And you also have a host of other just absolutely things that demonstrate Putin's true intention, from his massive propaganda campaign looking to manipulate the U.S. public around any sort of issue that could really polarize America, to the bounties he placed on U.S. soldiers fighting in Afghanistan. The level of duplicitousness of Vladimir Putin, it cannot be overstated. And this kind of power play move, again, it's very simple, but it's something that even Trump can understand. And that's not an accident. Vladimir Putin knows how different things will land, and a businessman knows when he's being pawned off to a lackey. So this kind of behavior, I think, it should be taken as a signal that Vladimir Putin's interest in peace is not really that significant. It's performative because, again, if you were really interested in peace, you would clear your schedule. There is no higher priority. Remember, this is the thing that Russia is doing right now. Their whole economy, their whole state apparatus, 1 million plus Russians are dead or wounded in this. There is no higher priority. There is no meeting with fucking Lukashenko, your best friend, your literal neighbor, that's going to trump this opportunity. It is straight disrespect, and 8 hours is a long time. So anyway, guys, before I talk about, of course, Zelensky's announcement about Kursk, I wanted to mention that, of course, like our illustrious Elon Musk, I too am a business owner. But unlike Elon Musk, I deliver on exactly what I say I'm going to. I created Strike Gum. Strike Gum, inspired by my time in Afghanistan, when if I wanted to get caffeine on a long combat patrol, I had to carry an energy drink. And that's, if you ever had a warm energy drink on a hot Afghan day, it's disgusting. But even now that I'm a dad and athlete, I need caffeine more than ever, believe me. And so Strike Gum solves that problem, right? It's got each piece. Each individual piece contains 90 milligrams of caffeine. That's as much as a Red Bull, as much as an amp energy. So if you want that plus zero sugar, go to strikegum.com or go to Amazon, search for Strike Gum. Link is in the description, right? In fact, Strike Gum is so beloved that even the drone pilots in Afghanistan that we gave some to, or excuse me, the drone pilots in Ukraine that we gave some to, I can't keep track of all the combat zones Strike Gum is being used in, have asked for more. Anyway, now, let's take a look at this. This is from Zelensky on X, who's reporting, of course, God, love it. This is the bad news sandwich, right? So, right, when you're giving somebody negative feedback, you always have to sandwich it. First, he says, man, Donetsk and Pokrovsk, it's stabilized. They're highly effective. Things are going great. And it's true. There's actually a lot of reports that the Liu Brigade has been literally crushing it in the Toretsk region, or in the city of Toretsk, that the Russians are actually being pushed out of Toretsk. Then he goes, a separate note on the Kursk region. The operation of our forces in designated areas continues. The units are carrying out combat tasks as required. Thanks to Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region, a significant number of Russian forces were withdrawn from other directions. Our troops continue to block Russian and North Korean groupings in Kursk. There is no encirclement of our troops. Now, this is, again, sort of a moving target, because Ukraine has never explicitly said this, but it has always been fairly clear that the real reason for the Kursk incursion is as a bargaining chip in peace negotiations. And the fact that Ukraine is being pushed out of Kursk is going to make negotiations much, much tougher, right? And so the fact that he's sort of re-engineering it and saying, well, actually, it was only a distraction. And one of the things that I want to point out is that reporting, for example, Chris Cappy's look inside Kursk itself, they found that it was a massive logistical effort, and it involved some of Ukraine's best units. And so as a proportion of total combat power, Ukraine probably committed more to Kursk than the Russians did. And I think that kind of math, right, when you're talking, there is a role for a feint or a tactical distraction operation, but those are always limited in scope and scale. And this has not been limited in scope and scale. Those troops would almost certainly have been better served in frontline positions, given the fact that, again, Russia was able to push them all out of it. We saw a similar outcome. This actually, the playbook is sort of very similar to, you might recall, during the last gasps of the counteroffensive, Ukraine, in an effort to sort of pin more Russian troops along this line here, began to deploy Ukrainian Marines in and around this river, or the sort of coastal villages along the river here. And this was, again, done at tremendous expense. But unfortunately, it cost Ukraine probably more than they ever got out of it. The idea, of course, was to keep Russian forces deployed here, but it ended up simply being logistically way too complex for the extremely marginal gains. And this has been kind of a repeated theme of this, of some of the Ukrainian offensive strategies, that simply Ukraine's best advantage has always been its extremely efficient fight, where it doesn't hold positions that it's going to lose. And when it tries to dig in and hold certain places steady, it represents an opportunity for Russia to really take a big bite out of the Ukrainian combat power apple. And this is a huge problem because essentially the entire Ukrainian strategy is about inflicting casualties and forcing Russia to politically lose the will to fight. And that seems to actually have been the best strategy in this whole thing. Look at the US and Vietnam, right? There was no place that the North Vietnamese occupied that was analogous to Kursk. There was no place where the North Vietnamese said, we will stand and fight here no matter what, right? At tremendous cost if necessary. The point was to never, ever put the United States in a position where they could inflict tremendous cost. In fact, the only people that ran that strategy in Vietnam were the losers, right? You might remember the French occupied Dien Bien Phu and said, this is our stand. But the North Vietnamese said, great, this is a target. You've manufactured a perfect target. And that, I think, is ultimately what the Kursk offensive has proven to do. I think probably also the changing administration has gone to Zelensky and said, listen, this is not going to get you anything at the bargaining table. And I think Zelensky was probably told that by someone, likely Trump himself or one of his representatives. But this is a really tough spot to be in. And because it incurred tremendous costs, and it really just put Russia on the playing field. In fact, there's some reports that the Kursk incursion actually mobilized more Russians because they felt they were finally defending Mother Russia and not simply fighting in some foreign war somewhere. Again, to use a Vietnam analogy, how many more people would have joined or supported the Vietnam War if the North Vietnamese held, a dozen towns in Northeast Oregon, right? It would simply have looked quite a bit worse. And so, again, I think the lesson here is that Vladimir Putin understands, for better or worse, that war is a political animal, that the information war and the battlefield war are of almost equal import, right? And Kiev and their NATO allies, frankly, NATO doesn't understand this. They think war is war and information is information, and it's just not the case, right? And so Ukraine, if their goal is to win the war, they have to destroy the morale of the Russian public to fight it. Because again, Putin has shown he's got one known weakness, and that is his unwillingness to mobilize. When he did the full mobilization, right? Remember, the Russian public fled the country in a panic. Many of them still have not yet returned, and there was a massive brain drain on Russia. Putin can't press that button again. And so Ukraine's strategy all along should have focused on forcing Putin's hand to push that mobilization button and destroy Russian credibility. The more of a bloodbath the war becomes, the less likely the Russian public is to support it. And one of the things I point out is that, again, everybody loves to sit there and say, "Oh, the Russians, they're winning. They're taking territory." But I think it was Preston Stewart that did the math and found that actually, if you had been a snail, a regular garden snail, and you had started at the Ukrainian border when the war began, after 3 years of crawling, you would in fact have made it to the Polish border. So to say that Russia is advancing at a snail's pace is in fact disingenuous. It's disrespectful to the speed of the snail. Anyway, guys, That's all I had. Thank you to Martin Baum, Chris Rossi, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, Sergei Zinchenko, Chris Holmes, Chris Gorsuch, Jenny M, Ida Skycall, all of our Lieutenant tier members. Could not do this without you, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.